Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home. Hey friends, we need your help. In order to help keep this show going, we need to hear back from you. Please take some time and check out our evaluation. Let us know if you've used any of the information you've gained from our show. Once again, you can reach us directly. You can call Karen at 304-234-3673. That's 304-234-3673. Or you can reach Dan at 740-695-1455. That's 740-695-1455.
Hello, Karen.
Hey, Dan.
And we are still in winter, but I think we're at the end of it, the tail end of winter.
Oh, who knows, man? We may be in full spring still.
Whatever happened to that groundhog again?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, well. Either way, as we always say, planting time is never too early.
Yeah. And we promised we'd stop talking about business, so we're going to talk about weeds instead this week.
That's right. Yeah. A different type of work. I'm not going to say it's more favorable, but it's different and it requires different kinds of patience.
This is true. And there's all kinds of weeds out there. And how you deal with them is going to be different depending on their situation. So like grass isn't really a big problem in a pasture field, right? But it's not a good thing to have in your vegetable patch.
But you don't want annual grasses, not a lot of them, in your pasture field.
Well, that's true.
I mean, you don't want giant foxtail.
Now, don't you go down that road.
and I'm going to make this show really short because it is titled Integrated Weed Management, yet it's the only way to deal with weeds, no matter what the context.
That's true.
Whether we're talking vegetables, pastures, corn, and anything else, and everything else.
I like that we're getting to the point where integrated pest management or integrated whatever management is the standard quo, because once upon a time, we're just like, oh, hey, there's a problem. Let's throw some chemicals at it and fix the problem. Well, we have learned that there are better things to do and that chemicals are now should be considered the last resort. So we're going to talk about different types of plants and how they respond to different types of activities.
Well, and let's not, what you said about chemicals being a last resort. If chemicals are your only resort, you're not getting anywhere. The idea is you can't just do one thing. And that's where the integrated part of weed management, pest management, whatever it is, comes into play. Because especially with weeds, if you're only spraying and doing the same thing, you're going to get the same results every time. Like, it's not, if you're spraying and you're managing the same way you did before, the weeds that you sprayed for are going to come right back. So it just doesn't end. It's going to be a vicious circle and you're going to be running in circles. And when you run in circles, you don't make forward progress.
Yeah. So let's talk about the different varieties of weeds that are out there. So when you look at the biology of weeds, you have two basic categories. You have grasses or monocots and broadleaves or dicots.
There's that botany coming out.
So for grasses, you have things like barnyard grass, which you don't want in a pasture field, or vegetable field. You have large crabgrass, smooth crabgrass. Those are the ones we always get complaints about for yards. Fall panicum, giant foxtail. But some of the more common broadleaf weeds we have complaints about are lamb's quarters, common ragweed, pigweed, velvet leaf, and lady's thumb.
Yeah. And so grasses and broadleaves, that is probably one of the biggest splits between, we talk about pesticide usage. There are chemicals or herbicides that are specifically designed for grasses or monocots, like you were saying. And there are herbicides that are specifically designed for broadleaves. And then there are herbicides specifically designed for everything. Those are the non-discriminatory, indiscriminate modes of action, and they will kill both grasses and broadleaves. So there are various tools you can use. But like I said earlier, if you're just going by, oh, I got broadleaf weeds, I'm going to spray, then you're not going to get anywhere. If you're just using broadleaf herbicides in a pasture field, for instance, those weeds are just going to keep coming back because you're not managing right. That's why they keep coming back. So another big category besides grasses and broadleaves, and if your decision making just stops there, a lot of problems can come about because there's also annuals versus perennials. Mm-hmm. And annuals are things like field pennycress, pineapple weed, shepherd's purse, green foxtail. Perennials, Canada thistle, wild carrot, bindweed, yellow nutsedge, and quackgrass. A lot of problematic weeds right there.
Yeah.
Annuals can then even be subdivided again into summer annuals and winter annuals. Before we get into summer annuals and winter annuals, let's talk about the difference between annuals and perennials. Annuals will germinate from seed, will have a vegetative growth phase, will go into reproductive phase, will produce seed, and then will dry out and die.
And the cycle starts all over again.
And the cycle starts over again. But another important factor in that is if it doesn't reach its full cycle, it keeps going. And once it reaches that cycle, it's headed out the door anyway. An example I like to give is corn. Not that corn's a weed. It can be a weed, but I think as far as annual production goes, I think corn is a beautiful example. You plant the seed, you have your vegetative states, it goes into your R stages, which is reproductive stages, and right, it tassels, it silks, and then you have the pollination event, and then you have cob fill. And once you have the fruit there, you have the kernels, you have the grains produced. And typically this happens by September, October. No matter how much you irrigate, no matter how much fertilizer you put down, that corn is just going to dry out in the field. And it's really important to understand that there are weeds that behave like that. So green foxtail is a great example. Sometimes you see it and you got the seed heads and the plant is obviously it's big because it's mature and it's gone through its entire life cycle. And then you want to just spray all these chemicals to kill the green foxtail, but it's already headed out the door. The metabolism's already slowed down. It might not even respond to your chemical because it's an annual. Now, if you have a perennial, for instance, perennials come back every year, and they have a specific cycle, even perennials, where first it will regrow from the storage root that's there, or it can regrow from seed. Either way, it reproduces and comes back if it's not removed. And you have the vegetative phase, the reproductive phase. But after the reproductive phase, what perennials will do is they won't dry out and basically die, but they will start pumping sugars and photosynthates from the leaves down to the roots. Now, if you were to spray a perennial at the stage where it's already past seed formation, you could get rid of that root. Some weeds are managed like that as far as like the chemical side of integrated pest management goes, where you can use a chemical that will then be translocated from the leaves to the roots and kill the roots, as long as it's a systemic chemical.
And so basically, if you treat two plants the same way and spray them after they've flowered, then one plant you may have success and the other plant you will have absolute failure.
And you're wasting your time and money.
Yeah. Right. And so it comes back to, you have to know the difference between your summer annuals and your winter annuals, because if they're going to be germinating at different times of year, one of the greatest ways to control annuals is through preventing that germination or damaging the little seedling that's coming out during germination. And so when you think about what weed you're dealing with, you have your summer annuals like your giant ragweed, your purslane, your Jimson weed, your eastern black nightshade, your cocklebur, whereas your winter annuals are mare's tail, henbit, common chickweed, purple dead nettle, and yellow rocket.
Yeah, and they're all terrible weeds in the wrong context. And cocklebur is a good one to talk about as a summer annual, because so cocklebur can be a very problematic weed in pasture fields. And it's a summer annual, right? So summer annuals, they're germinating late in the spring. And by the time you start getting into fall, we talked about the annual life cycle, by the time they've already set seed, they're big. And a lot of people like to spray cocklebur late in the fall, but it's already produced a seed. It's already put in that seed bank. And if you spray it at that point, yeah, maybe you'll kill it like a few days faster than it normally would die on its own.
But you're not preventing the problem.
You're not preventing the problem. And the next year's result's going to be the exact same thing, because as an annual, it would just dry up and die on its own. So think about the timing of these sprays, and some of the best ways to take care of annuals is take care of them before they seed. And another integrated pest management approach is just to prevent that seed from germinating to begin with.
Yeah, that's right. So you look at those pre-emergent herbicides, but even beyond the herbicides side of things, if those, it's an annual, and you go out and you collect the seed heads and dispose of them through fire or whatever, then you are preventing that seed from germinating next year. And you can control a population of annual weeds simply by making sure none of those seed heads mature and fall to the ground.
And there's the concept of smothering too. When you have a seed bank in the ground and that seed, most of the time it's in a dormant state, and there are certain signals that the seed perceives that'll activate its germination cycle. A lot of times when we talk about smothering seeds out, light is a very big inducer of germination, right up there with moisture and temperature. So by keeping a good cover, I guess a good example is grazing. So when you overgraze, you expose a lot of the soil surface to light. Mm-hmm. That exposure will induce germination of that seed bank that's already there. So one of the ways to keep annual seeds from germinating, perennial seeds even from germinating, is to have a good cover. Sometimes we talk about residual growth. That's a concept in pasture management where you have grass growth there, you have legumes, you have desired forbs there that will absorb the light before the light hits the surface, the soil line, where all those possible weed seeds are. And if you're overgrazing all the time, you're battling seeds more and more often, and you're displacing a lot of that grass. That's the desired forage that you want in that type of agriculture.
Right, and it's the same concept we use when we recommend putting mulch down, whether it be plastic mulch or wood mulch or whatever mulch you're trying to use. The whole goal is to keep the light from reaching the soil.
Exactly. Yeah. So just a little bit on weed biology, right? Yeah. I know we hit the seed bank pretty hard, but that's kind of where the root of all the problem is. So you have that seed bank. It could be big, it could be small, right? And then for whatever reason, you're going to have germination. You're going to have a signal. It can happen. Sometimes it's autonomous and it'll just go. So then from the seed bank, you have the seedlings. The seedlings are the most susceptible, the easiest way to get rid of a weed. They don't have deep roots. They're more receptive to chemicals. They're easier to smother. And if the seedlings grow, they go into mature plants. The mature plants, whether it's a perennial or an annual, will then make seeds. The seeds will then be added back to the seed bank. And then you ask, okay, so how do I deal with the seed bank? Well, as Karen was saying, one way is just to prevent that seed from getting deposited to begin with and increasing that seed bank load. Another thing is the seeds in the seed bank, depending on the species of weed that we're talking about, will have different dormancy. Like they're viable for a different amount of time, right? Longevity. So just by keeping those seeds from germinating, a lot of times the abiotic factors such as winter and heat and sometimes dryness will take care of it. There are predators that will also attack seeds. A lot of beetles, a lot of field mice and stuff will also eat seeds. So by preventing the growth of that seed bank and by preventing the germination of that seed bank, what you are doing is you're making it easier for yourself in the long run by having less weeds to deal with.
Right. And so some of the things you can do or you should consider when you're trying to deal with that seed bank and trying to prevent these weeds from becoming an issue is you need to understand the dormancy of the seed, the longevity, how long that seed lives in the soil without germinating. You know, there are some plants that have a 500-year longevity, and that's mostly because we just haven't been able to figure out how long it takes to kill this poor seed. Predation, like Dan was saying, germination, emergence, reproduction, how they reproduce, and then how they disperse. Are they windborne? Are they distributed by birds? How does this particular seed find its new glorious home?
And there are seeds with short longevities.
Yeah.
Can you call it short longevity?
I think so.
All right. Well, I think the concept is there, but there are seeds like Palmer amaranth, for instance, that is a vicious weed, especially in soybean production because it's a broadleaf. It has a huge seed bank. It can produce so many seeds, yet the longevity of that seed, as far as the studies show, that the seed's only viable for up to 5 years. So by managing that seed bank and keeping it from germinating, keeping more seeds from happening, aggressive management within the first 3 to 5 years will really reduce the amount of weed pressure for Palmer amaranth, which is also a plant that's resistant to a lot of herbicides. And that actually led to a lot of the problems that we're seeing with it, because the only way that a lot of the farmers that had this problem or that have this problem right now, some of them, the way they were dealing with this issue was herbicide only. They were only using chemicals to deal with this problem. And as soon as you get resistance, obviously that chemical then is not useful against that weed. And worst off, that chemical could help the weed by killing all the competition around it. It might not be the crop, but most of the time when we talk about soybean and corn crops, we're not talking about a perennial type crop. So eventually there is bare ground. And if you don't have any other plant competition, that's kind of the idea with cover crops too, is then that seed bank grows, that weed grows, and it just becomes more and more of a problem every year.
Yeah. And the big problem with that is a lot of bird seed is contaminated with amaranth. So it's not always the bad amaranth, but whenever the birds come, they eat the seed and then they spread the seed because they don't digest everything they swallow. And then they can respread this out into your field. And
not only that, it's designed that way. There are seeds that require scarification.
Mm-hmm.
So they require that, I guess, breakdown through the digestive tract, whether we're talking birds or mammals.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And so it's a cycle. And just because you get rid of your weeds once doesn't mean you're done forever. And that's just what I was trying to get at there. So this is a constant in agriculture, and something you just got to deal with.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about different weed control methods. Let's not get mired in the evils of Pomeranian.
Well, yeah, it's the biology of weeds is very, very complicated.
Yeah, it is. And, if you don't know what your weed is, how do you treat it properly? Now that you know that the weed control has so many different aspects to it, if you don't know what plant you're trying to control, how do you know how to control it? And so that just comes back to Extension's whole mission of trying to make sure that we are providing the education that you need, but also the assistance you might need to help you identify what your weed is. But please don't just bring us a random leaf and say, what is this?
That's right. A leaf is a leaf, a flower is a flower, and a plant is the entire thing.
Right, including the roots sometimes. So we're not expecting you to dig up a whole tree and say, hey, what is this tree? But we need more hints and more clues to figure out what a plant is than just a leaf. So if you can bring the stem, if you can bring the roots, if you can bring the flowers or fruits along with
or a picture to go with it.
Yeah, pictures are great, but do try to get clear pictures. And if you have a small plant with small flowers, using the macro option on your camera phone is really helpful. And if you don't have that or want to go a more simple route, you can just take a magnifying lens and put it in front of your camera lens, and that'll help you get a closer image of that plant. And that can really mean the difference between us being able to determine what the plant is or what the plant isn't.
So does macro mean like zooming in if you have a phone that you're taking a picture with, like zooming into the...
So there's a difference between the digital zoom and a macro lens. And so not all cameras have this option. But if you just do a digital zoom, what it does is it reduces the number of pixels so that it can get a closer view. But it's not a clear picture. So if you use your digital zoom and just take your fingers and make the picture bigger, you're actually reducing the quality of the picture, which makes it hard to get a good image when we're trying to identify what it is. And so there's actually on a Samsung, there's a macro button. And I'm pretty sure that Google Pixel has one too, and I'm sure iPhone has one as well. But it changes which lens is being used, and you can also buy lenses that clip onto your phone that can get you in close. Now, if you have a regular old-fashioned camera, you have a lot more flexibility with what you're focusing on. But very few people carry an SLR camera in their back pocket when they're out in the field trying to manage weeds.
And I don't even know where to take 35 mil film anymore. like where can you get those developed? I have no idea.
You have to send it out, I believe. There's still places, but they're fewer, much farther than they used to be, for sure.
And I bet you it's expensive now to do that, isn't it?
Probably.
Man, we are, you know what? This is called getting in the weeds.
Well, before we get too far into the weeds here, I do want to give credit to Chris Galbraith, the extension field specialist for Ohio State and Michigan State. Does he work for both? I'm confused.
We claim him as Ohio State. He's a great guy.
Okay. So anyway, he put together this presentation that we're giving to you through the podcast. And so we want to make sure that we give him credit for the work that he put into this so that we can share the information with you.
Yeah, it's part of the Ohio Private Pesticide Recertification Program.
That's the great thing about Extension, though, is that our goal is to get the information to the public. And we go through lots of different venues, lots of different avenues, from in-person training to videos on YouTube to podcasts to flyers and fact sheets. There's a lot of different ways to learn. And Extension tries to touch on all of them. So if you're not an auditory learner and you'd love to have a fact sheet, let us know and we can get you some information. or let your local extension office know, and they can get you some information. Because I know I'm going to go into other weeds here real quick.
That's what we do. We deal with that every day.
Dan forwarded me a request for tree information, which I love. And so we talked about trees, and it was funny that because she is from Florida, and I was just in Florida with my parents, and they wanted to plant a tree, and I didn't know how to advise them because the Florida growing conditions are so very different than here in the Ohio Valley. You know, they have sand, we have clay, and they have sun, a lot of it, and it's super bright. It's just a completely different environment. And so the advice that I would give you if you were living in a southern state with a completely different soil and climate is to reach out to your local extension, because growing conditions change, weeds change. There's a lot of variety in our climates and our ecology, and you have to go with what's local.
You do. And my parents are also in Florida. Everybody's in Florida. But I'm talking to my parents, and they want to plant something. You know, the last thing, at least we worry about in our part of Florida, because I don't want to assume that Florida is all the same either.
Oh, yeah. And Florida's lots of differences, too, from north to south.
But it's like the drainage, right? At least in the western panhandle of Florida, where my parents are, drainage is not an issue. Drainage is a very, very big issue here in Ohio, in Eastern Ohio.
Yep.
And it's when you're talking about just trying to figure out what tree to plant in Ohio, you look beyond sun, you look beyond growing zones, and drainage might be where things make or break. It's a make or break for success in many plantings. Mm-hmm. And that's just not a layer of thought in a place like the Western Panhandle of Florida, because it just all drains. Salinity might be an issue that they deal with that we don't. Yeah. But drainage it's a local thing. Like I said, it's beyond sun, it's beyond growing zone. It's unique to the area.
Yeah. And like we said, your perennials, your annuals, all of them are going to be different if you're in a different growing zone. So recognize where you are and reach out for local support, because there's a lot of variety, and that's a great thing, but it does provide some challenges.
Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.